Hello again, my fellow crafters. Today we're making gatefold cards. I watched quite a few videos on YouTube and I put together my favorite 6 ideas, and at the end I'm going to show you two that I came up with by myself. First, I need to show you how to calculate and make your card bases. So all you need to do is measure the longer size of your cardstock and divide it by 4. I have here on the screen the most common sizes, but if you understand that all you need to do is divide it by 4, you will know how to calculate for a different size. Feel free to pause and take a print screen of these numbers if you need to. I don't own a scoring board, so I'll show you how I do it myself. I just measure it with the rule that number that you divided by 4, you're going to mark it and score. But if you have a scoring board, that's where you're going to score. You turn it around and score the other side, and you should have a perfect gatefold. To be honest with you guys, you don't really need to measure and score both sides. If you measure one side and just fold the other one to meet the first one, you'll be good. So I did that with with all my card bases off screen, and I'm just going to show you how I assembled the cards. For this one, I'm going to use it as landscape orientation. And I already had prepared a beautiful butterfly with flowers because why not? I'm just gonna stamp. I use some adhesive to hold my card base closed because I want to stamp some text, and I used, I believe it was antique linen to stamp the writings, and that's a red rubber stamp by Simon Says Stamp. And I just trimmed it down because the stamp didn't cover end to end of my card base. So it's going to be kind of a bit of an odd size. But if you're going to make it US size, it should be perfect. So all you need to do with your element is add adhesive to the one half, only one half. Sometimes you see me drawing the line where the half is with a ruler, but if you're good at eyeballing, you don't really need to do that. And I believe I just added a white panel to the inside of that one and called it done. It already had the sentiment at the front. Now this one, I actually embossed my front panel. That was the full size. And then I cut it down to half the size so I could use half on each side of my card front. But then I swapped them. Please be aware of this. If you do this at home, if you try to recreate this card or something like it, be aware of where your halves are, because I turned them around and they don't really match at the front anymore. And I only realized after it was all done. It's not that noticeable, it's not a big deal, but if it bothers you, yeah, you might want to keep an eye on it. I tried to swap it, but it was the first one that I stuck down wrong, so there was no way to fix it. And then I had this beautiful die from Altenew, and I'm just gonna cut it down to size and then trim it in half as well and stick them down each half on one side. I used vellum on this one, so I am literally using the smallest amount because I of prepared glue my that I elements can, off screen, I'm gonna because tell I you don't what like I'm when gonna the do vellum next. starts warping. I had 4 And or 5 that are dark water-based will glued make your together vellum to make warp my main if you use too element much. and the You frame don't that I really need used that much around it. to stick them There down.
is
A set of dies by Simon Says Stamp that cuts these very, very narrow borders, and I used the positive and the negative to create this card. I also used a Simon Says Stamp die for the sentiment, and what I held up to the screen so you could see is that it looks like a chipboard because I glued like 4 of this card base together. And then I'm stamping my sub-sentiment. I'll glue down my sentiment below it. I already measured it up. And now I'm just marking where the half is. Once again, you don't really need to do this. If you do, make sure that you trace the line where you're going to put glue onto, because you might not want your line visible once you stick it down. And then, of course, I'm going to move it around. I never wait. I'm not a patient person. I keep trying to open to see if the glue is not oozing out to the other side, because that could glue my card shut. And then the whole element falls and I try again. But then to make this an interlocking card, you have to add glue to the opposite side of the frame. So I added glue to the right side of my main element, and then I'm gonna add glue to the left side of my frame, and that should make them close and interlock perfectly well. It really worked for me. There's really no secret. It's very, very easy. So you just need to add glue to half the main element. If you add to the right, it will be the left of your frame, and the other way around. You just need to remember that it's different halves, opposite halves. That's it. So I added some sequins or some gems and called it done. It doesn't get any quicker and easier than this. You can see how it opens and closes very easily, and it holds the card closed. This is our next one. For this one, I use one of those dies. They're very intricate, very pretty, and they are made usually for gatefold cards. The straight side of this die actually doesn't cut at all. It will only cut like intricate, smaller details. They're like the negative pieces. And I just trimmed down the very top and very bottom, and I had the whole side cut. I just needed to remove the little inner pieces. I do the same thing on both sides. This is my card that is 6x6. I'm gonna cut and stick some gold foiled cardstock to the inside of this because I didn't want it to be completely see-through. And I really liked how gold and white looked together on the previous card, so I kind of recreated it on this one. You only really need some little dots, once again, to those intricate elements to glue them down to the gold foil cardstock, because you don't want your glue oozing out everywhere and dulling the mirrored cardstock. And then I used a smaller note card on the inside because this gatefold doesn't cover the whole card base, and I didn't want whatever the person writes on the inside to be seen from the outside when the card is closed. I hope that makes sense to you. So I just used a smaller note card. And then I did a belly band. My belly bands, I usually like to have the closing part at the front, but this one I did it to the back because I used an embossed sentiment at the front. I added some very thin strips of the same gold mirror cardstock along the upper and bottom edges. Just make sure that when you glue down your belly band that you don't make it too tight so you can move it up and down without problems. Ask me how I know. Okay, so the next one, I also used a 3D embossing folder, and then I applied some gold pigment ink to give it some detail, and then I came with a detail brush and added even more to the inside of the leaves because I wanted the color to be a little bit brighter. Now I'm gonna trim the inside of this gatefold card base a little bit. I removed just a hair from each side, and I'm gonna stick down my two panels. I was aware of not changing directions and putting them messed up this time. So there is a tiny space, a tiny slit, and I created this element. It's very easy. You just need a little piece of cardstock, a little strip, and you're gonna fold it like this. I'm gonna bring it closer to the camera so you can see it. Um, you just fold the two sides to the center and then out. So you're gonna have an element that looks a bit like this. I hope you can see well. And you're gonna stick your main element to this piece, and that's gonna slide up and down into your card base and hold it close together. So here's my main element. I'm just gonna use some glue, and I trimmed the excess of my panel. Again, I added another note card, smaller one on the inside, so you can see the writing through the front. And we're already moving on to card number 5. This one, just like the interlocking gatefold card, were inspired by the amazing Jennifer Maguire. I just used a dotted plate for this one, for the front panel. Again, it starts like the other one, so I just split my panel in half. I'm gluing each half to one side. I try to be aware of the pattern once again. I try to make a mistake only once, guys. Sometimes it doesn't work, but stick with me. And then I'm gonna have two elements for this one. I'm just using small strips of paper, folding them in the middle. You can cut them down to the length, to the height that you need. And I'm gonna stick each one to one edge of my front card, kind of towards the center. I'm using dry adhesive for this one. I'm gonna start with my bigger element because I want to measure and see where I'm gonna hide the smaller one behind the bigger one. So you just need adhesive on both sides of that strip that you folded in half. You're gonna, I'm doing both strips at the same time, where just press it down, and then I am measuring it against my bigger element. I trim down a little bit. This one is completely eyeballed. There are no measurements. It depends on the size of the element that you're going to use. So I'm going to remove that backing, add it to the edge of my card, and then just add my bigger element to it. Again, I'm going to try to keep each half on one of my element crossing one half of the opening. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the smaller element, but this one, because my strip was way too long, I'm going to cut it down to kind of half. The size doesn't matter that much. I'm adding the adhesive, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to make sure that that smaller element that has an extra sub-sentiment on it, it's going to be hidden by the first one. Once you're happy with the positioning of your elements, just remove that backing once again. I always double and triple check everything. And then you can stick down your secondary sentiment or your secondary element if you choose to have something else on the inside. And you're done. I made most of my cards today into wedding cards or anniversary cards because I really needed some of them on my stash. And for the next one, I had this panel also with mostly dotted details, but I'm gonna add a little bit of something to it later. So I'm just gluing my two halves on each side. And for this one, I chose to actually use ribbon to close it. I already prepared one side of my element, but this is how I did the other one. I have a strip of cardstock. I'm gonna use dry adhesive and stick the ribbon to the back side of the cardstock strip. I'll add more adhesive so I can stick it down and make sure that it's gonna stay in place. This is the second element that I prepared of screen. I'm gonna stick each one of them to one half of my gatefold opening. Just using a tip ruler to keep them straight and make sure that they are going to align one side with the other. I'm adding a bit of glue to where the ribbon is to make sure that it's not going to fray. And that's it. My ribbon, it's kind of hidden, but it's also secure. Now all you have to do is press it down and it won't move, it won't go anywhere. So for my element, I'm gonna do the same thing as I did before and add glue only to one half. It doesn't matter if it's left or right, you can choose. Just make sure that once you place it down, that glue is not going over to the other side. That's why I keep opening and checking it. Once the glue is fully dry, you can actually tie the ribbon. I'm gonna add pearls to my details and all over my card from top to bottom because I thought that it could use a little bit more detail, but you can skip this if you don't want to your card to look over the top. You could just add maybe some flowers or some butterflies to your main element and you would look just as cute and just as sweet. It is a bit of work, but I really like how it turned out. And then I usually tie my bowl upside down because it looks kind of better once it's done. And I'm just gonna trim down the excess ribbon and this card is done. This one doesn't really need a smaller note card on the inside because you can't see it from the outside. For our next one, I'm going to use two card bases, and this one will be a bit different. This one is my own idea. So what I'm going to do is cut them diagonally, right? It doesn't really matter where you cut them, like if you're going to cut from top to bottom longer or shorter, as long as you have two that will match up. So one card base you cut left to right, the other one you have to cut right to left, if that makes sense. So you're just gonna glue down the two longer bits. I did trim a hair down to make them meet without a seam. And once you close them, you can see that the two diagonal lines meet in the middle. I'm gonna add some detail to the pieces that were left and use them at the front of my card. Once again, I'm using tape to make sure that they are not gonna shift, but I placed them a little bit crooked and I didn't notice, so it cut off a little bit. And that made me have to trim down the whole panel to hide it, to hide my mistake. But you guys can learn from my mistake. This time I actually remembered to have my blocks around to hold that down for me. I usually don't remember that. I find that the dots kind of push the background away from your card base a little, so the extra weight really helps. And once it's all dried, you can add your elements. Once again, be aware of your main element of only using the glue where you want it to stick down to your panel. This one was a bit of a weird one. I needed to do a diagonal line. And then I felt like the card was a bit naked. They needed something else. So I had this thin frame from the same die set that I used before from Simon Says Stamp. And I am going to make it work for me. It's actually not the right size for this card, but I'm adding glue to it, opening it, and trimming it down to the size I need. And then I'm gonna make sure that the bottom half meets up with the top half. And it just takes a little bit of eyeballing and measuring and whatnot, but it works in the end and it works well. I started adding glue to my frame, but then I felt that using the tape ruler here will be easier. And then, as I told you, I keep moving it to check that it's not gluing and having to redo it. So do as I say now, as I'm doing, guys. Make your lives easier. Then once it's dry, you just need to trim the excess and suddenly, ta-da, you have a frame that meets and looks perfect. I'm just gonna add the last glue dots to the corners and the edges to make sure that it's not gonna go anywhere. And that's it. Now for our last card, it's a bit of a different idea. Instead of splitting the card base in half, I am going to split my panel into a smaller size. I am going to fold the card base the same size as the smaller one. So I'm measuring here where I'm gonna need to fold it. Using my tape ruler to score it exactly where I want. And then I can fold it. You can probably not see it well on the video, but I can. And then you just need to meet up the top one and it will be exactly the size and the height that you need. So that's why I told you in the beginning that you don't really need to fold and score both sides. If you just make sure that the first one is straight, you just need to meet the other half in the center and that will be okay. So here I'm just gonna stick down the other side of my panel. I already prepared my elements. I have like very thin strips of rainbow colored cardstock stuck to just printing paper. And I'm gonna stick that to the edge on the top fold. This one, I'm gonna use it as portrait orientation. I'm adding just a very thin gold strip on the bottom. And here I made a mistake. You're gonna see it in a minute, but you also see me fixing it. This panel had some very tiny hearts and I wanted to use them, so I colored them with Copic markers and I want to add them to the spaces where they were before. But that strip actually covered them, so I had to remove the strip, add the hearts, and then glue it again. Because the glue hadn't dried, I could do it without damaging. But if you're gonna try to reuse this idea, guys, be smarter than me, please. I know that's easy. I find that it's very easy when someone shows their mistakes because then it helps me. Like when I see other people's mistakes, it helps me not to do the same. So if you're enjoying these videos so far, please, please, please follow and click on subscribe. And I have way more ideas where these ones came from, okay? I'm just adding my sentiment here, and that's going to be my main element. Again, I'm going to just glue the upper half to of the element to the panel. So that holds it together, but it also makes it easy to open and close. Thank you, bye!